Dusk gathered like old velvet in the godswood of the Red Keep, swallowing the pale stones and the murmuring pool until they seemed no more than memories of water and rock. Eddard Stark sat upon a damp bench beneath an elm, feeling the southern air lie heavy on his shoulders like a cloak he had not asked to wear. The red leaves here were painted on. There was no weirwood, and the wind made no whisper of a face. He missed the sound of the north, the clean bite of it, the way a man's breath cut the cold and proved he yet lived. "My lord hand," Renly Baratheon said, stepping from the shadow of a laurel. He came in green, the embroidered stags at his cuffs catching what little light remained, his courtesy as fine as his clothes. "You asked for quiet." "I did," Ned said. "For truth, too." "Let us trade honestly, then," Renly said, moving closer, lowering his voice. And for a moment there was nothing of the court's bright jests about him, only a young man with watchful eyes and the sense to fear what was coming. "The king lies dying. You know why I came to you last night. I offered you strength, and you clung to parchment." "Parchment is law," Ned said, "and law is what holds the realm together when strength tears it." "Strength is what keeps parchment from burning," Renly said softly. "I came to say the same thing as before, only plainer. When Robert dies, and he will, the queen will set her boy on the throne, and your letter will be as useless as a prayer in a storm. Take the boy at dawn and his brother with him. Take the city watch with us. Keep them close and alive by all means, but take them." Ned watched the pool ripple when a leaf fell to its surface. He had refused before. The memory of it weighted his chest. He had refused because his whole life he had chosen the hard, straight road even when it led into fog. Yet he had also watched his friend hunt boar with wine for blood and the queen with secrets for teeth. He had seen the little book of lineages and felt the ache of certainty snap into place. The seed is strong, and there was no strength of seed in the king's golden-haired issue. He thought of the last time he had knelt by a dying man and promised him mercy for a child. "You said your men could do it," Ned said, "without blood." "Dawn is kinder to steel," Renly said. "The queen's men will be sleeping or slow. Loras and a score of my knights know the ways to the prince's rooms. There is one difficulty only, and that wears white." "The king's guard," Ned said. "Baratheon." He knew the old knight's name was spoken with respect even by enemies. He was not a man to take a child from a mother's side, some would say, but he was a man to obey the last command of a dying king. If he could be won to law, dawn could come without blood running into the stones. "Baratheon is an honorable man," Ned said. Renly smiled crookedly. "Honor can be a sword turned to either hand. Will you use it?" The Godswood's pool made quiet song. Southron insects stitched the air. In the dark, Ned felt the north look at him with clean, cold eyes. He rose. "We do it at first light," he said. Renly let out a breath that seemed held for 10 years. "Then, my lord hand, we are allies." "You and I are not enough," Ned said. "We secure the boys without harm, and we bring the small council to the throne room. Robert's seal names me protector until his heir takes the crown. We will keep the peace until Stannis comes to claim what is lawfully his." Renly's smile vanished. "You would give the crown to Stannis." "I would not give what is not mine. The law gives it," Ned said. "Stannis would count coppers at a feast and send the singers to the stocks for singing off-key." "He has the charm of a cold hearth," Renly said. "A hearth still warms," Ned answered. "When this is done, will you stand for the king's justice?" Renly studied him, unreadable for an instant, except for the quick muscle leaping in his jaw. "I will stand for the realm, and I will stand for you, Stark. But Stannis will not give me what I want." "What is it that you want, Lord Renly?" "To keep the realm from being devoured by lions." He lifted his hands. "Let us do one thing at a time." They spoke then of ways in and out of the Red Keep, of servants who would look the other way and others who would not, of the Queen's guards and the city watch. Ned named names. Men he had judged sober in Janos Slint's ranks. Men who took their oath to the realm for more than a purse. Renly named corridors and stairwells, and where oil lamps were kept and which tapestries hid doorways and which did not. They talked until the darkness built itself into a larger darkness and the still pool could not be seen at all. Above the gods' wood, the sky thinned to ash. Ned went to Robert's chamber and knelt beside the bed. He did not wake the king. There was no point in putting more pain into a life that had overflowed with it. Robert's breath sawed and rattled, and the wine made a sweet, rotten smell beneath the sharper scent of poultices. Ned placed the sealed letter upon the table beside Gammer's bomb and the Book of Lineages, and stood. His leg, not long healed from Jaime Lannister's ambush, ached dully. In the corridor, he found Barristan Selmy standing at his post, still as a pillar. The white cloak fell in a long line like a waterfall made of snow. The old knight bowed his head, only the slightest measure, to the hand. "My lord hand," Barristan said. "Sire," Ned said. "The king sleeps." Barristan's eyes moved to the door and back. They were pale eyes, clear. "I would speak with you," Ned said. "Then speak," Barristan said. "Here is as good a place as any to hear truth." "I will speak with Renly as well," Ned said. "And with Varys and with none other." Barristan's mouth twitched, which was as much surprise as he showed. "You would speak treason where the walls are all ears?" "I would speak of law," Ned said. "Will you hear me?" Barristan's hand touched his sword hilt, not as threat, but almost as prayer. "I will hear." They stood in the shadow of the door, and Ned spoke of Robert's letter, and of seed and of hair black and blonde as banners in a summer wind. He spoke of the queen and her brother. He did not lay the charge like a cudgel, but placed each piece as he would place stones in a wall. Barristan stood unmoving until he did move, which was only to look at the letter, and then at the book. "I served a man who burned fathers alive with the sons watching," Barristan said at last, as if to himself. "Ares had a law for everything, and every law served his madness. I have seen too much flesh made meat to think that words alone can save us. But a last command is a last command. He named you protector, and Stannis is heir," Ned said. "I will not move without your word, Barristan, but at dawn the queen will move unless we move first. If we keep the peace until Stannis comes." "Renly," Barristan said quietly. "He came to you last night, and again tonight," Ned said. "He is willing to help keep blood from these halls. You trust him." "I trust the need," Ned said. Barristan closed his eyes, and for a moment he seemed not an old knight but a boy kneeling before a king in a hall of tourneys, asking to be taken into white. He opened his eyes and nodded. "I will go where the last command points, so long as it points to the realm. I will not see a child harmed." "Nor will I," Ned said. "Then dawn," Barristan said. Dawn came like a knife drawn carefully to keep it from scraping. Mist rose off the water in the lower city, and the fishmonger's cries were muffled, and the red keep stones leached the night out of themselves. Loras Tyrell, his golden hair braided back from his handsome, too young face, waited beneath a coil of staircase with 12 men in green and gold who would have followed him into the 7 hells for a smile. The hound, broad-shouldered and burned, ate an apple slowly in the entry to the prince's rooms, his small dark eyes flat as slate. "Ser Sandor," Loras said lightly. "A fine morning." The hound spat a bite of apple into his palm and tossed the core aside. "Mornings make no difference," he said. His gaze cut to the white cloak behind him. Ser Marentrant had been posted at Joffrey's door since midnight, and his sword hand hung with the heaviness of a man who has not slept. "Open," Loras said. "I have my orders," Ser Maren said, but his voice had already given him away. There was doubt in it. "The king's last command is lettered and sealed in the hand's possession," Barristan said from the corridor, and even Ser Maren straightened at the sound. The old knight stepped forward as if no time had passed since he first put on the white.
"Stand aside, Ser Merin."
Ser Maren's eyes slid toward the hound, who shrugged. "I guard the boy," Sandor Clegane said to no one in particular. "I don't fight the realm's law. Not this morning." The door opened. The chamber stank of incense and perfumed oils. Joffrey rose from his bed with outrage already in the corners of his mouth. the petulant lines of his face sharpening as if a carver had put a blade to them. "You have no right," he said, but his voice broke on the word right. "My mother." "Your mother is safe," Barristan said. "Dress, my prince." He paused on the title and then continued. "Dress. You are to come with us for your protection." "I am the king," Joffrey said, snatching for dignity as for a cloak in winter. "I will have you whipped, all of you, you will." The hound's hand fell, heavy and without malice, on the boy's shoulder. "Dress," he said. The word was iron. On another level, more green and gold moved while those in white remained at their posts under Barristan's quiet eye. Tommen came blinking from sleep, plump and small as a half-grown pup, and when he saw Loras Tyrell he smiled, for he loved bright things and kind faces, and Loras had always given him both. "Ser Loras," Tommen said, "have you come to take me hawking?" "If you like," Loras said gently, "but first we will go for a ride." Myrcella's door was opened not by a knight but by a septa, and the girl came forth with her hair braided in a crown and her mouth set like a grown lady's. She looked at Ned Stark without fear and curtsied. "My lord Hand," she said. "My lady," Ned said, "you will come with us a little while." "Will mother come too?" she asked, and Ned said, "Soon." Cersei was found in her solar with her hair loose and her robe fastened hastily, and when she saw the white cloaks and the green and gold, and Ned Stark standing with the old knight, she laughed, not because anything was funny, but because she did not know how not to sneer. "Bring them for me to see," she said. "Have the lambs learned to herd the wolves now?" "Stop this," Ned said, and for an instant the words were the same as they had been years ago, in another hall in winter. "No one is to be hurt." "Hurt?" Cersei strode forward until she stood as close to Ned as propriety allowed, then closer still until propriety had to make way for rage. "You came to my rooms with armed men. What would you call hurt?" "The king's last command," Barristan began. She turned like a viper. "And when did you begin to listen to commands, old man? You stood for a mad king and watched good men burn rather than break your vows." "It cost me," Barristan said simply. "It cost everyone," she hissed, and then returned her gaze to Ned. "You play at law, wolf, so let us speak law. Robert's son is his heir." "The law names Stannis," Ned said. "Your children are safe. You will be kept in comfort. When Stannis comes, he will judge." "Stannis would judge the moon for shining where he did not want it to," Cersei said, and her lip curled. If any of you thinks, that men will follow Stannis rather than my son, then you do not know men at all." "Dress yourself, your grace," Ned said. "You will have time to say everything you want before the council. But not now." He left her with the white cloaks and walked away because if he stayed he might not. In the throne room, the light came in hard and white through high windows, cold as dragonbone. Robert's chair, high and black and ugly, crouched upon its dais like a beast waiting to be tamed, each blade jutting. Ned had always hated it. It was a seat made to cut any man too proud to sit carefully. The small council assembled like actors in a play they had rehearsed together but never performed. Pycelle waddled in late, beard wagging, the bells at its tips chiming softly with self-importance. Varys glided like a pale cloud with eyes. Peter Baelish came smiling, which made Ned trust him even less than when he smiled nothing at all. Renly stood at Ned's right hand because this was the arrangement they had decided, and because seeing him there would already be half the work done. Barristan stood a pace behind, sword at his side, white cloak brushed and simple. Janos Slynt came with a black cloak and small eyes that measured doorways and exits rather than men. Cersei entered between two white cloaks as if they were pillars erected in her honor. Her hair now tamed into a crown, her chin lifted. Joffrey came scowling with the hound at his shoulder. Tommen walked with Loras, chewing his lip. Myrcella's face was pale but composed. They were placed upon chairs before the dais, not high and not low, not with court around them as audience, but with the council and the knights and the city watch as witnesses. Ned placed Robert's sealed letter upon the arm of the chair. "This was written and sealed by His Grace, King Robert Baratheon," he said. witnessed by the Grand Maester and sealed with the king's own hand. It names me protector of the realm until his heir can come to King's Landing and take the crown. Pycelle coughed importantly. It names his heir, my Lord Hand, as his son Joffrey. It is known. It names his heir, Ned said, and did not look at Cersei. He looked at Barristan instead, and then at Renly, and then at nothing at all. There are reasons to believe that his grace's children are not issue of his seed. The words left the air colder than the light, and for a heartbeat all that could be heard was the insect drone of a distant fly. Then the room breathed. "You lie," Joffrey said, nearly shrieking. Varys's eyes were unblinking, thoughtful. Peter Baelish's smile grew smaller, which in him was an alarm bell. Pycelle's beard rattled. Slint's hand twitched on the hilt of a short sword. "The seed is strong," Ned said. "The king's line is black of hair. His brothers are black of hair. His cousins are black of hair. The book of lineages records it. Your children are all fair as the queen." Cersei laughed again and clapped her hands once. "Have you ever considered, Stark, that the gods sometimes sport with the careful? That a wolf looking at a lion's mane might think it straw because it is not fur? Men who served the king all their lives looked," Ned said evenly, "and died for asking what they saw. Lord Arryn." "Ser Hug, I have the king's letter, and I have truth besides. By that letter, I keep the peace until Lord Stannis comes to claim what is his." "By that letter," Baelish said lightly, "you ask the Queen Regent and her son to accept terms that will see them shut away until a brother arrives who has never learned to smile at anyone but himself." "I ask them to submit to law," Ned said, "as we all must." "You ask lions to wear leashes," Baelish said. Renly spoke then, his voice calm where others were sharp. "Lions wear collars at feasts when it pleases them to be petted." Janos Slint cleared his throat. "My Lord Hand, what would you have the watch do?" "Keep order," Ned said. "No Lannister man is to leave the city. No harm is to come to the queen or her children. No man is to wear another lord's badge within these walls. We are not at war within King's Landing." "What of the gold?" Baelish murmured. "We seem to be at war with it every morning, and yet every afternoon we drink." "Peter," Ned said, turning, "you will remain within the Red Keep until the king comes. The Hand's command." "For my safety?" Baelish asked, innocence like perfume. "For the safety of those who might be confused by your advice," Ned said. "Ser Barristan, I would ask you to assume command of the city watch until the king's peace is established." Janos Slint's small eyes widened. "My lord, you have served," Ned said. "Now you will rest. You and yours will be kept in good quarters and good pay. Ser Barristan will take command until the king comes." There was a moment where the room itself seemed to lean and test whether it might fall. Janos Slint looked to Peter and found, perhaps for the first time, no charming smile to catch. He looked to Cersei, and her green eyes were all iron. He bowed, stiff as an old hinge. "As you command, my lord." Cersei's face had the stillness of black glass. "Do you think you have won something, Northerner? I have lived in this city while you played at being a farmer in snow. No wall is without a door if a woman is willing to pay the price." "I know the prices in this city," Ned said, "and I will pay the one that keeps children alive." She tilted her head and studied him, all contempt and calculation. "You played at mercy once before, I am told. It lost you a sister." Renly stepped forward the width of his boot. "Enough." She held his look as one might hold a knife, then turned and sat, and lifted her son's hand, and petted it and said nothing. The ravens went out by noon, one winging hard for Dragonstone with the hand seal and a second with the old black-sailed sign of the Master of Ships, recalling duty. Another to Storm's End with Renly's words and no seal at all, only a phrase he said would be understood. A third to Old Town for the High Septon. A fourth and fifth and seventh to every great house of the realm, saying simply that the king had named a protector to keep the peace until the lawful heir should come, that no man should move banners without writ elsewise. Varys came like fog at the edges of rooms and said in his soft voice that some doors were already closed, and some had not yet been opened, and that doors worked both ways in matters of treason. Ned listened and said, "Do not call it treason when a man obeys his king." And Varys smiled and steepled delicate fingers and made no argument. He saw his daughters before noon. Arya came running like a colt, her hair already come loose from its ribbons. The little sword at her hip made her look like a page in a play. "They said men came to Joffrey's rooms," she blurted before Sansa could shush her. "And the Hound was there and Ser Loras too, and they took him to keep him safe," Sansa said. And it was plain a dozen ladies had told her those words, so that she had almost made a dress of them and did not hear how thin they were. "They will treat him as a prince. They will treat him as a boy," Ned said. "And he is to mind Ser Barristan. Arya, you will move your lessons to the mornings and remain within the keep. Sansa, you will do the same, and you will write a letter for me." Sansa's eyes brightened. "To Mother, to High Garden," Ned said. "You will write to Lady Marjorie's mother, the Lady Allery. You will speak well of Willis Tyrell and of your wish to see gardens that bloom in winter." Sansa flushed as only a girl can flush, with hope and confusion both. Arya made a face. "I thought you said I could write a letter." "You will write to your brother Robb," Ned said, and saw her chest fill as if she could contain the North in it. "You will tell him to keep his head cool as a mountain in winter and his sword sharp." "What about Mother?" Arya asked. "I have written to her," Ned said, "in my own hand." On Dragonstone, the sea hammered black rock and sent spray up like ragged banners. In the painted table chamber, Stannis Baratheon stood with his hands braced upon the great map of Westeros, head bent, mouth a hard line. He read Ned Stark's letter once, then again, and the third time he did not read, but he held the parchment as if to wring something sharper from the fibers. "He calls me," Stannis said. "He calls the lawful heir. He writes as if a man who would not take a city with his hand would take a realm with ink. He writes because there is courage in ink when swords are sheathed at the right hour," Davos Seaworth said. He stood with his hands clenching and unclenching, feeling phantom stings where the ends of his fingers were gone. "If the queen is checked and the boy held, the city is safer than a wall of brave men and fools." "Fools are more numerous than brave men," Stannis said. He looked toward the doorway where the Red Woman stood, her eyes half-lidded. "What do your fires say?" "They say the night is long," Melisandre said, and the sound of it made Davos want to step backward, though he had sailed through storms darker than any cloth she wore. "They say a man with a sword of light will wake stone dragons and kings will burn." "They say many things," Stannis snapped. "I asked you what this letter means." She smiled, which Davos thought of as one of the more dangerous things she did. "It means a choice. The wolf offers you a line to walk through fire without burning your feet. Take it, for now." Davos cleared his throat. "You were master of ships. The men on the galleys still call you lord in their hearts. The fleet at Dragonstone is yours to lead if you lead. Sail to King's Landing, and it will be a crown upon your brow whether Ned Stark puts the iron in your hands or not." Stannis looked at him a long time, and there was nothing loving in it, nothing fond. But there was truth. "You are a smuggler," he said, "but sometimes you sound as if you have smuggled a mind past your own doubt. Make ready the fleet. We sail by nightfall." He wrote a letter to Renly that said, in a hand as severe as his jaw, that law did not require love, only obedience, that he would take what was his and tolerate what was not, provided it did not stand in his way. He wrote to Storm's End to the Castellan because Renly had taken himself to court. He wrote to the lords of the Stormlands to muster at the Mander, to swear themselves to justice, to stand by their oaths. He sealed each with his seal and gave them to the Raven Master. On the King's Road, beyond the Mummer's Ford, Tyrion Lannister sat a tired horse and listened to the river talk as it slid past stones and reeds. Bronn rode behind, silent and narrow-eyed, and 3 hill men rode somewhere on Tyrion's shadows, smelling like goats and wild hills. "We will find your father," Bronn said finally. "Oh yes," Tyrion said. "He will be delighted to hear I have escaped the Eyrie and slain one of the Vale's flower-bred champions with a cell's word and luck. He will be delighted to hear you live. Bronn said, and even Tyrion smiled at that game of words. The river carried other things that morning: rumor and raven-feathered truth and whispers like flotsam. In a wayside inn, they learned that the king was dying, and then that the king was dead, and then that the king had named a northerner to keep the peace. The lion banners in the village were being taken down by men who had decided perhaps they had put them up too quickly. Tyrion drank cider and made a face because it was sour, and then he made another because the world was. "My sister will be clever," he said. "Cleverness bleeds," Bronn said, "when a dozen men hold it down." In the west, Tywin Lannister sat in a tent large as a small hall and pressed his knuckles to his lips and measured the realm. The letter from King's Landing lay on the table, its words cool and controlled, its seal broken. "They have taken the boy," he said. "Janos Slynt has been dismissed. Barristan holds the watch. The wolf has done what wolves do when they remember their teeth." Kevin stood at his shoulder, a comfort in a world that had turned to quicksand. "And Stannis, sailing," Tywin said. "If I know him, he is counting oars and not sleeping. He will be in the bay within 3 days, if the wind likes him." "Tyrion?" Kevin asked. "He will come," Tywin said. "He will come with a tale that makes him look clever and reckless and more alive than he ought to be. And I will need him." He stared at the map. "Send word to Jaime. He is to withdraw from harrying the Riverlands and draw back to the Golden Tooth. If the city cannot be taken clean, we will not try to take it filthy. We will gather. We will feed. Winter is in the north, but famine lives in the south. We will not starve a lion." In Winterfell, the ravens came one after the other until the maester's eyebrows lifted in a way that said he wished to be a rock instead of a man receiving tidings. Robb Stark read the first and the second, and by the third his mouth had settled into the line that Catelyn knew from his father's face. "Father keeps the peace," he said, and there was pride in it that made Catelyn fear. Pride was a fine way to trip and break a neck. "If the Lannisters move against him, they will," Catelyn said. "They already have by the time this letter flew. Jaime struck at your father on the street and killed men Ned had brought from Winterfell. Tyrion put hands where a hand should not be and was taken for it. The lion does not lie down because the stag tells him to." Robb lifted his chin. "Then we will call the banners." "On your father's order?" Catelyn asked. "On my judgment," Robb said, and the boy's voice did not crack. "If father holds the city, he needs us on the road south. We must keep the west from pouring all its gold into swords and sending them east. We will draw their teeth in the Riverlands." Catelyn looked at him and saw not a boy at all, but a man who had learned to set his face because others would look at it for the shape of their own lives. She put her hand in his hair and smoothed it as if he were 5 again, and then she let go because he was not. "We will speak to the lords," she said. "We will do it properly." In the Red Keep, Ned slept little. The halls changed their sound when a city clenched itself to wait. Laughter thinned, the clack of dice grew muffled, the steps of messengers sped. He sat with Barristan and with Renly and spoke of food and pay for the watch and what stores the city held in its cisterns and granaries. He sent Loras Tyrell with a subtle letter to the Reach, a betrothal to Willis, with Sansa's name written carefully and truthfully and no boasts. Loras read it, smiled a smile that was not for himself, and carried it as if it were a flower. Baelish lingered like smoke where men drank. He offered suggestions with the level voice of a man who had no stake, and Ned took none. That night, Peter came to the Tower of the Hand, where Ned sat at a narrow table with papers and bread uneaten. "You disappoint me," Baelish said, closing the door softly, making of privacy something like a bargain. "I had you for a man who liked to walk a path different from the beaten road. When it suited, you took the straightest. The straightest road leads where you intend," Ned said. "I do not intend the gutter." "Then you intend the cliff," Baelish said. "There is something to be said for falling with style." He drifted closer, eyeing the little pile of letters. "Do you think the Tyrells will tie their garden to your winter rose? Sansa and Willis. Sweet. He is said to be gentle and bookish. You think to win a host with a promise to put a girl in a garden. I think to make the realm see a different shape when it looks at the south, Ned said. If the Reach stands with the king's justice, the Lannisters fight the crown, the storm, the north, and the rivers. It is a war only fools would take. Baelish tilted his head. We are a rich people in fools. This city has endured enough of them, Ned said. You may leave. Baelish smiled and bowed and left as if he had been dismissed from a tryst with a queen. Ned watched him go and told himself he had done one thing right by sending Baratheon to command the watch. The old knight had spent the day moving quiet men as if they were stones in a wall, turning some posts, doubling others, giving the city a face that was less likely to be bought. On the gate to the river, he placed 2 men who had fought in the king's wars and 2 men who did not drink. On the door to the vaults he set 3. Stannis' fleet showed black sails on the horizon late on the 3rd day. The bay lay calm as hammered pewter. Ships moved like a patient hand across a map. Davos stood on the prow of the Black Betha and watched the city rise, pale and red and cruelly beautiful, as if a child had made a castle from knives. He let his eyes trace the walls and kept his heart from jumping like a fish in a net. The city saw the fleet as it had seen pirates and traders and the king returning from hunt. It made noises because it was a city and had to, but there was no panic. The galleys came to anchor in neat rows like chessmen. A great Baratheon banner went up on the Black Betha, black stag on gold. Bells rang, then faltered, because bells did not know whether to ring for a funeral or a coronation. On the quay, Ned and Renly stood with Baratheon. Varys had suggested the right measures. A careful welcome, not too many soldiers, not too few. Stannis came down the gangplank as if he were walking out of his own house, lips thin, eyes colder than the sea. He wore no crown, only a mailed shirt and a dark surcoat with the crowned stag and fiery heart sigil stitched small over his breast in red and gold thread. Davos walked a step behind, gray and unlovely and real. Lord Stark, Stannis said. He did not bow. Renly. Brother, Renly said. King, Baratheon murmured under breath, not as a proclamation, but as if he were saying the truest of many words. Ned heard it without looking at him, and the old knight gave nothing else away. They walked side by side through the city, past eyes that watched over bars and out of shutters and from behind veils. Men bowed for different reasons and women curtsied without knowing how their hearts moved in their chests. Stannis did not nod or smile or look right or left. He smelled the city as a man smells an enemy. Sour wine and fish and sweat and rotten fruit and hot stone, and did not wrinkle his nose. In the throne room, Stannis stopped 10 paces from the dais and looked at the chair of steel as if it offended him. Cersei stood beside her children, her face carved. Joffrey scowled at the sight of Stannis the way boys scowl when confronted with a tutor they cannot charm and cannot escape. Tommen swallowed. Myrcella did not blink. By law, Stannis said. I am king. Cersei laughed, a sound like glass ground together. By law, you were born without warmth. The law can do many things. By law, Ned said. The king named a protector until his heir should come. The protector summoned the heir. The heir has come. The council will hear the proofs. The council will hear nothing, Cersei said. If you do this, if you let this man claim to be king upon the word of a northern fool and a fleet, you will make war that will eat the realm to bones. Renly stepped forward. War began when you put a crown on a boy who had no right to it. We would end it. Cersei's gaze cut. Would you, little brother? You who like games more than prayer. I like to win, Renly said, and there was nothing bright in it. That afternoon, the High Septon, weary and dignified and sweating beneath his cloth of gold, sat in the September of Baelor before the open doors while lords and knights came like schools of fish, once to see and once to be seen. The book of lineages lay open upon a lectern. A page with black-haired names was turned and turned again. Several men who had loved Jon Arryn wept. A few men who had not loved him pretended not to be impressed by what he had died for. The faith made no declaration, only the kind of silence that left a shape in the room. At dusk, the Septon lifted a hand and said in a voice hoarse with the day that the seven love truth more than comfort. That night, Cersei sent for Ned. They met in the small council chamber with no one else present but Varys, who had faded into a corner and made of himself furniture. "You think this is mercy," Cersei said, too tired for spite and too proud to weep. "You think it is mercy to keep my children alive like birds in cages while their grandfather calls banners and their uncle sleeps in a camp and wakes to ride and no man knows what hour a blade will find them. You think it is mercy to give my son to the care of an old man who will make him kneel until his knees bleed and call that honor. You think you know what I think," Ned said. "You have known me a month and a half." "I know men," Cersei said. "I know that when men speak of mercy, they mean something they can stomach. I know that when men speak of law, they mean another man's pain. I know that when women speak of their children, they mean war," Ned said. "But I am not making war upon your son. I am making peace upon this city. Accept that your son will live. Accept that the realm will live. Accept that you do not always get to choose how." Her mouth trembled then, and she mastered it and straightened. "I have been many things," she said. "A daughter who disappointed her father by not being a son. A wife who drank the dregs of a king's cup. A mother who kept her children's throats from knives by putting knives in other hands. I will not be a woman who watches men decide whether her son breathes." "You have a choice," Ned said. "You can let Stannis be king, and your son can live. Or you can keep fighting, and you will lose him." She stared at him for a long time. When she left, she said nothing. Varys stepped forward from his corner as silent as fog. "There is a kind of bravery in telling a lioness that the calf is not hers," he murmured. "There is a kind of cowardice in not," Ned said. By week's end, the city had learned that a Baratheon sat the throne again, and for most small folk that meant little except that the soldiers had changed which banners they wore when they took wine from the casks and meat from the stalls. But the gates were shut to lions, and the Lannister men within the walls were disarmed and fed and kept like dogs that had not bitten yet but might. The Tyrell raven returned, green wax broken, and inside it was not a hand but a garden. A letter speaking of friendship and the hope of peace, and Lady Allery's pleasure at the prospect of Sansa and Willis's contentment. "High Garden does not despise winter," the letter said. "It simply prefers to see it from a sunlit window." Mace Tyrell swore his strength to the lawful king. The Reach host began to move east. In the Riverlands, Jaime Lannister found himself riding hard on roads that stank of smoke. The Riverlords had burned their own fields rather than leave grain for lions. Whispers ran faster than horses. A boy with a trout on his breast rode out of the woods with 50 men behind him and vanished before Jaime's scouts could do more than kick dust. Another day, a cart of hay in a narrow lane burst into flames and sent ash into the air like small white birds. Jaime cursed cheerfully and rode on and did not see that the road itself bent around him in a way it had not before. Near the Whispering Wood, Robb Stark set a trap as neatly as a man sets a table. The Great John laughed, savage and delighted, when he saw how the boy placed men like stones in a river. Theon Greyjoy grinned like a fox and did not know yet which henhouse he would prefer. When the Lannister van rode into the trees, the whispering grew louder, which is how men tell each other in a wood that their luck has changed. Jaime fought like a man who had been given a fine name and had resolved not to let it shame him, and he broke through once and twice, and then a horse went down under him, and a boy with red hair and blue eyes put a blade to his throat and said, "Yield." And Jaime laughed and yielded, because even lions know when their teeth will snap on their own tongue if they bite. They bound him and took him away, and Jaime went whistling as cleverly as a bird in a cage. Tywin turned at the Golden Tooth and frowned at the shape of war. With the capital closed to him and the east thickening with green and storm banners, he drew back toward Harrenhal, whose black towers stabbed at the sky as if trying to break it. The castle was big enough to feed an army for a while and ugly enough to keep men from thinking they were home. He sent ravens to Casterly Rock and to lords who owed him gold and swords and received words that were respectful and quick and not always promising. He leaned on a table, knuckles white, and kept a war contained to the Riverlands not by courage but by cold calculation. In King's Landing, Stannis set order like nails. He named men to the small council who would not curry favor. Davos to whisper where truth hid in coin and cask. Maester Pylus brought from Dragonstone to weigh the words of Grand Maester Pycelle, who had suddenly discovered that age made him forgetful. He had Barristan remain Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and gave him leave to say no when it pleased him to remind lesser men that white had a meaning. He named Renly Hand because he was not foolish. The realm needed a smile. Renly accepted with grace and with a private smile that said he had asked for bread and been given a loaf with more seeds than he had wanted, but still a loaf. Ned remained Lord Protector until the coronation. After, he said he would remain until the war in the Riverlands was concluded, and then he would go north with his daughters to the ground that would not move beneath his feet when he stood on it. Cersei was not paraded, because Stannis was not a fool, and Ned had asked for mercy without asking for humiliation. She was kept in rooms where the windows looked over the bay and the ships, and a Septa sat always within reach of her voice, and Ser Ares Oakheart strained his honor until it creaked like an old bow keeping watch at her door. Joffrey ate with Ser Barristan once a day at a small table with bread and stew and water, and once a week wine like a man. And at first he threw the cup, and the old knight's patience was a harder floor than stone. After that, the boy ate without throwing. Tommen cried once because the hound had not come to see him, and then felt foolish when the hound did come and taught him to feed a dog with an open palm. Myrcella took to needlework and to a Septa's verses, but her eyes were knives when she looked at men in cloaks. A formal trial for treason and incest and more besides hung like a sword above Cersei and did not fall. Stannis did not love delay. He intended to let it fall. Ned argued to put off the cut until the war could be bound, and Davos quietly agreed, and Renly argued that executing the queen would wring all tenderness from Tywin Lannister's calculations and leave only pride. Pride burns longer than love. The coronation took place beneath Baelor's gaze under a sky like hammered milk. The High Septon anointed Stannis with oil and muttered sacred words, and the king's face was that of a man who had been splashed with rain he had expected. Renly's smile shone like a coin. Bells pealed. The people shouted because they had been told this was a moment to shout.
Stannis
feated a sword that was not bright with glamour and did not set any heart aflame. It was steel and honest and cut the air as he swore. In the weeks that followed, the Tyrell host marched east and camped along the Rose Road in an abundance of tents that looked like a field of flowers had decided to sprout cloth instead of petals. Mace Tyrell wrote very polite letters and spoke of loyalty to the crown and told long stories about feasts he had given for knights in his youth. In his hall at Bitterbridge, Renly met Loras's father across a table where apples sat in a bowl and did not roll. They spoke of supply and the temperament of pikemen from Old Town and of whether Willis would like a northern wife. They did not speak of what Renly's eyes said when they looked at his father-in-law-to-be, because it was not a thing that southern halls could hear. From Bitterbridge, a rider came hard with news. Robb Stark had taken Jaime, and the Riverlands were rising like a river after a long drought. Tywin had withdrawn to Harrenhal. The Great John had eaten a man's ear in a quarrel over a tent peg, and men were singing northern songs in the dark that made southern men's skin go strange. The realm moved like a creature with many legs, most of them uncoordinated, and yet it moved. Stannis sat with Ned in the Tower of the Hand late one night and spoke in the low tone of a man trying to keep his rage precise. "We will break Tywin at Harrenhal," he said. "We will come at him from east and south, and the boy will press him from the north with Tully. If you want mercy for the queen, this is how you get it." "If I want peace for the realm," Ned said, "this is how I try." They spread maps. They moved stones. They did not pretend that the stones were anything but men. Davos sailed upriver with a score of light ships to choke the forks with chains and firepots that he hoped not to use. He didn't love fire. He had seen too much of it eating men and cities. He liked the river because it surprised you less than the sea. It had a bed and it kept it. He brought messages to Lord Tully and to the Blackfish, and found in the old knight a mind like a knife that had not dulled. "We will make him move," Brynden Tully said. "We will make him choose which fire to put out, and we will set a third while he is choosing." Outside Harrenhal, autumn came early, as if the gods had decided to put a cloak over the land's shoulders. Tywin Lannister watched his scouts return with faces set for bad tidings and received them as a man receives letters he knows will contain words that will make his life smaller. "Green and gold on the road from Bitterbridge," one said. Stormland lords with them, the fleet on the river. Another, the boy in the north moves faster than he should. We think the Tully host grows. Think, Tywin said. Lord, the scout said and swallowed, and Tywin did not need to beat a man to teach other men to think. He did not run. Lions do not run. He did not charge, because the man who charges without knowing the ground hangs his own sword around his neck. He drew his host inside Harrenhal's ugly arms and sent for more grain and more arrows and more men to die. He wrote to Casterly Rock to have wagons ready if the dance grew too hot. The battle never became one of those stories where men ride at dawn and die by noon. It was smaller, quicker, crueler. Fires set in supply lines, bridges taken down at the hour chosen to ruin retreat, outriders cut and cut again until the horses learned fear. At the God's Eye, a skirmish flared like a match when the Blackfish's light cavalry fell upon a Lannister foraging party and found behind them more than they had hoped. Robb Stark came with his guard at the sound of horns and found himself looking at a wedge of Lannister knights who had made a name over 3 wars. He held them and bent and did not break. When night fell, he held still. The next day, the Reach itself arrived, and the field began to smell of crushed grass and apples and blood. Stannis came on the 3rd day, grim as a stone wall. He had left Renly to keep the city and march the remainder of the Reach north by a safer road. With him came quiet men with no names in songs and Davos with a face like a battered cup. It was not a grand thing when they saw the Lannister host draw up outside the gate of Harrenhal. It was only necessary. Tywin Lannister stood in black armor that made him look like a well-built tomb. He studied the field and the lie of it and lifted his hand, and the banners moved. The battle at Harrenhal had no name anyone could agree on because the singers did not see most of it. They were too far away and too frightened. Men died at the base of a tower the Targs had left like a broken tooth. Men drowned in mud when the river swelled because someone had pulled into the water a dam that no one had noticed until it was too late. Roose Bolton set a trap and then smiled when his own men fell into one beside it and had to be pulled out by men who now owed him life. The Great John laughed and roared and came away with a gash across his ribs that he said was a kiss from a Lannister. Tyrion Lannister found himself on foot because his horse hated arrows and had decided to hate them violently. He fought in a confusion of sounds that he would later pretend were less confusing. He saw a man about to drive a pike into Davos Seaworth's belly because Davos had slipped in a patch of mud that hid itself like an assassin. He put his dagger in that man's kidney and had a moment to think that some men deserved songs for accidents they did not choose. Davos rolled, came up with the kind of look a man keeps for the breath he thought he would never take again, and nodded to a stranger saving his life without knowing or caring why. Later, when Tyrion had time to think, he realized that he had saved a man whose name would be whispered in the halls of power for years he had not been promised. By dusk, Tywin saw that his lines had held but not moved the way he wished. He saw the fleet on the river like teeth and knew his wagons would not be filled. He saw Robb Stark's men where he had not placed them in his mind, and that offended him. He drew back into Harrenhal with the slow anger of a man forced to retreat and did not slam the door, because that would have made a noise that might become a story. He wrote a letter to Casterly Rock ordering the evacuation of some treasures no one was to speak of. He spoke to Ser Amory Lorch and Gregor Clegane in low voices and used words that made men sick. The siege began. Siege is another way of saying that hope becomes bread and then becomes mold. Ned came to the field 2 weeks later when the lines had drawn themselves into a pattern men could understand. North and Riverlands to the west and north of the ugly castle, Storm and Reach to the south and east, the river held by men who slept on deck because camp beds made them feel wrong. He rode with a small company and with Barristan and with a handful of northern men who had survived a city where summer never had the decency to be clean. Stannis' greeting was short and sufficient. "You should not have come," Stannis said. "If they strike the city, Renly is hand," Ned said. "The Reach is with him. The Watch is with Barristan. The Queen is in hand. There is more use for me here, for a little while." They made plans. They tightened them like bandages. When word came that the Freys had opened the twins for the northern host without demanding more than men had expected them to demand, Ned sent a silent thanks to any god that might care to receive it. He hoped it was honor. He suspected it was fear. The breaking of Harrenhal was not a glorious thing. It came on a morning when fog lay low and gave men a chance to make mistakes with a little shroud before they died. Davos's men floated crates of pitch down the little tributary unseen. Robb's men feigned a retreat along the northern line and drew a sortie far enough for a hole to be opened in the lesser wall where a mason had cheated a lord 100 years past. Stannis went through that hole at the head of a handful of men with faces like axes and came out the other side with blood on his sleeve and mud up to his knees, and he looked satisfied for the first time in a very long time. Tywin Lannister did not die that day, because fate defers sometimes for reasons of its own. He left through a postern gate with a company so small it would have shamed another man and rode west with a mouth like iron. The lion had not been caged. He had chosen to leave the room. Harrenhal fell like a man too heavy for the chair he sat in. Men inside laid down arms with the dull relief of a pain that has ceased to be constant. Gregor was not among them. He had slipped away by night to go and be a monster somewhere else. Among the prisoners were men who had done worse than fight. They were named and shamed and hung where the crows could find them. Among them too were pages and squires and cooks and laundresses and girls who had looked at swords and seen a way to feed themselves for a day, not knowing that each day would ask for the next until nothing was left. These were spared and sent away with coin and fear. Jaime remained in a tent under heavy guard, smiling at his chains. Tyrion was found outside the walls with blood dried under his nose and dirt on his face, and he laughed at a joke no one else had heard. After Harrenhal, the war changed from a storm into rain. It did not stop. It simply became less likely to tear down trees in a morning. Stannis took no joy in parley, but he understood economies. He sent Davos and Ned to treat with lords whose eyes had turned to Casterly Rock for gold and found their hands empty. Lord Lefford bent the knee. Lord Brax did not at first, and then did so after his wife spoke to him in a hall at dawn where the fire smoked and the smell of it made both of them cough. The terms were neither cruel nor soft. The Lannisters would keep Casterly Rock. They would keep their honor as far as men could keep honor by signing parchment. Jaime would be held until Tywin returned good coin and grain to the Riverlands by a measure sternly set. Cersei would be judged by the faith for adultery and treason, and this was a word the High Septon tasted like a foreign fruit, incest. The judgment would be held 6 months hence to allow the realm to breathe and the passions to cool enough not to set a sept alight. If Tywin attempted to move the West's armies east, the terms would break and every sword would be turned to him. Joffrey would be permitted to take vows at 17 at the Wall or to enter the faith service in Old Town. Tommen would be fostered at Storm's End. Myrcella would be sent to Sunspear to be a ward of Doran Martell, who had remained quiet and cool in this war and would appreciate the gift of a hostage disguised as a guest. Cersei's mouth was white when she heard it. "You would send my children to strangers," she said. "I would send them to the realm," Ned said. "Strangers?" she repeated, and something in her voice cracked open and showed what lay beneath, and it was not a lion. It was a mother, but she was not asked, and that was the point of kings. Winter's first breath crept south over the neck and laid a hand on Winterfell. Robb wrote letters with stiff fingers. Catelyn prayed to gods that would listen and to those that would not, and she put her forehead to the heart tree and asked it to be a better parent to the world than the world had been to its children. Arya ran in the yard with a wooden sword and grinned when she bruised a boy twice her height. Sansa wrote to Willis of a pup that had been born in the kitchens and named Primrose by the cook's daughter, and she wrote of the gods wood in the Red Keep without a heart tree and how strange it felt to pray without a face to look at. And Willis wrote back of a garden where a white rose had bloomed a second time out of turn and said perhaps winter was not the enemy, only a friend who came too long. Stannis sat the throne and managed. He did not make the city love him, but he made it eat. He did not make courtiers crowd his halls with songs, but he made them come with petitions and leave with answers. Renly made tourneys because men needed something that was not war, and he stood beside Stannis in court as if they had always done so. At night, sometimes they argued until words had no teeth left. In the morning, they began again. Davos brought news of smugglers who had ceased to steal bread and begun to sell it properly for less than they had stolen it for, because he had used their greed against itself. Varys whispered of Essos and of a Dothraki Khalasar moving like a spill of oil over sand, and a girl with hair like polished bone, and eggs that were not eggs. "She is oceans away," Stannis said, and narrowed his eyes. "Oceans can be crossed," Varys murmured. Ned heard of it and put the knowledge in the place where he kept things that might matter later. He visited the September of Baelor more than once and stood in its cool and watched light fall through colored glass until the floor became rivers. He missed the quiet of a godswood where wind made prayer. He missed snow. He missed his sister. He watched Sansa show Arya how to stitch a rose into a handkerchief, and he saw Arya try, awkward and unwilling, and he loved them both so fiercely he had to sit down. When the time came for judgments, the September was so full that sweat made its walls smell of bodies and oil, and the poor outside made a murmur like a sea. Cersei walked with her head high and her hands empty. The High Septon said the words the faith says when it decides it must weigh a great stone upon its scale and see if the beam will break. Witnesses spoke in voices that carried. Pycelle with a cough and trembling hands and eyes that skittered, Varys with gentle ambiguity, a book opened and laid flat like a corpse. Cersei did not confess. She did not deny. She stood and took words into her mouth and broke them against her teeth and spat out the pieces. When the verdict came, it was a compromise, as all human judgments are. She would not lose her head. She would not be free. She would go to Casterly Rock to live confined and guarded, and to pray as she pleased, and to write letters no one would read unless Stannis permitted. She would see her children on the days set by the crown. She would never again be queen of anything but herself. She accepted it with pride, which is another kind of surrender. Joffrey chose the wall. It surprised everyone who had believed he would choose any other life rather than one that demanded he obey men who would not fear him. He chose it because he could not bear the thought of a September. He chose it because somewhere inside him something small recognized a shape of penance that fit his limbs. Or he chose it out of spite for the idea of songs in Old Town. The Hound rode with him to the ship that would carry him north. When the Hound returned, he went to the stables and drank in the shadows until Loras Tyrell found him and said nothing and held out a skin of wine, and they shared it like two men who had both seen too much of boys and what men make them. Tommen went to Storm's End with cheeks. He still could not keep from going pink when spoken to by strangers. The Castellan, there was a man who frightened no one and therefore was good for a boy. Myrcella went to Dorne and learned to bow differently and to speak with her hands as much as with her mouth. And she learned that the sun can be kind even when it is cruel. She learned to look at water and see not a mirror but a way to survive. Doran Martell taught her patience by teaching her Syvas, and she learned more than he taught. Ned returned to Winterfell after a spring that had been winter and a winter that promised to be longer. He stood upon the wall walk and felt the cold bite his lungs and loved it more than he had loved warm wine. Catelyn came to his side, and they stood without speaking. The ravens brought news of small things then, a levy of taxes adjusted on the Rose Road, a dispute between the faith and a guild of butchers settled by a decree that made both think they had won. Tywin Lannister's letters, as cold as wind over stone, in which he promised nothing and delivered enough to keep the peace he hated. On a night after the first snow fell, when the drifts were shallow and the air smelled like iron, Ned crossed the yard to the Godswood and knelt. The weirwood's face was old and patient. He had different prayers now than when he had left the North months before. He prayed for a city that had cut him, and for men he did not love who had nevertheless done their duty. He prayed for girls who were women and boys who would go to walls and to deserts to be men. He prayed for his sister not to forgive her because there was nothing to forgive, but to tell her that the boy she had left had done what he could. Somewhere far to the east, on a night when stars felt close enough to touch, a girl walked into a fire with her dead husband's body and her unborn child's bones and came out with 3 small bright lives screaming in a language no one else had known for a century. When the news reached King's Landing, Varys's mouth became a line and Stannis said nothing and Renly said, "Well, that will be a song." Ned heard it in Winterfell and felt the bones of the world hum and knew that whatever peace he had helped make was not a door that closed, but a bridge, and that bridges are for crossing. He looked up at the face in the tree, and the red sap wept, and the wind spoke as if it had been waiting to say this all his life. He stayed there until the snow buried his boots and the night turned old. Then he rose and went back into the castle where the fires burned and the walls held the heat and the sound of voices made a home he could still recognize. And he thought, the law holds until it doesn't, and the duty holds until it breaks, and when it breaks we pick it up and bind it and call that honor. He slept, and in his sleep he dreamt of a crown not of steel but of frost, and of the way it melts and runs and becomes a river that goes where it must.